Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Winning Women Talk Show. I'm your host, Regina Shearer, and I want to thank each and every one of you for spending time today watching and listening to the Winning Women Talk Show. As you know, if you're a regular listener or viewer, each and every week we present to you a different woman who shares her journey to success. Success does not necessarily mean making millions of dollars, although many people see that as being successful. But for these women, we found that no matter what their income is, they thrive and are passionate about doing what fulfills them, doing what is their calling, their vocation, and what they believe will make a difference in other people's lives. And that's been a common thread, that whatever they've been passionate about, it always seems to make huge differences in others' lives. And we also have discovered that they are women who are committed not only to what they're passionate about, but that they're engaged in their communities and in other activities outside of that. They also give back to the communities they live in and gives back to others. If you have been, if you are a first time viewer or listener, we hope that you will be inspired and motivated tonight by the things you hear, because our goal is to give people incentives that if they have been on the precipice of wanting to do something that they really love, that they're passionate about, that tonight they'll be motivated, inspired, and that fire will light under them for them to say, if she can do it, so can I. And so we invite you, though, as you're listening, as you're viewing, to participate, because we love to hear from you. So if you are interested, you can do that in two different ways. You can call in. Yes, we have a call in center, and you can call in with your questions or your comments. That number is 781-384-5587. I'll say that again, even though it's on your screen. 781-384-5587. And if you're a little phone shy, feel free to email me, Regina, at rgbinternetradio.com. We are excited tonight to introduce to you our guest for this evening, and her name is Reverend Dr. Terry Ofori. She is the project coordinator for the Episcopal Chaplaincy Connection Initiative at the National Association of Episcopal Schools. In that role, she's leading the research, relations building, network database development that will connect Episcopal school chaplains with chaplains and campus ministry leaders in higher education. Now, prior to this work, she was the Dean of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion at Brooks School in North Andover, Massachusetts. She is an ordained minister, chaplain, educator, and scholar practitioner whose career has centered on spiritual formation, educational leadership, student development, and the cultivation of communities of belonging. And in talking with her, I find her experience covers leadership, teaching, chaplaincy, and so much more across independent schools. Now, listen to this list. And some of those schools that she has shared those gifts with have been Ursinus College, Harvard University, Brown University, Wellesley, Emerson, Simmons, and Bloomfield colleges. And she also leads youth leadership development programs in Ghana. Her work integrates pastoral care, educational leadership, theological reflection, intercultural engagement, and accompanying students and young adults through life transitions of meaning, of service, and of leadership. She earned her bachelor's in history at Mississippi University for women, Master of Divinity to Harvard Divinity School, a Master of Theology from Princeton Theological Seminary, and she's completing her doctorate at Virginia Theological Seminary. There's so much more to her, but I'll let her tell you the rest. So welcome, Terry, to the Winning Women Talk Show.
Thank you for having me, Bishop Shearer. I'm really just inspired by your invitation.
Well, you can just call me Regina because I always like to meet with our guests before the show, and we've had a wonderful conversation. I just feel like I've known her for a long, long time.
Yes.
And so, one of the things that we always do is start by asking you, Terry, tell us about yourself, where your roots, your upbringing, and all the things that got you to this point in life and put you on this trajectory of chaplaincy.
Well, actually, I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Um, I lived there for most of my life. Where I did live my junior high school years in Brooklyn, New York. And so I've always been very interested in the spiritual life of people. And I don't quite know why, but I definitely believe that was a calling. And so I recall when I was baptized as an infant, but then later as a young adult in Baptist church. And I remember Vacation Bible School being very pivotal and formational in my life and being very interested in just knowing more about God. And so I think that was a way of calling me into the ministry at a very young age. For uniquely, during my junior high years, I went to a public school in New York, Brooklyn Crown Heights, New York, and it was predominantly Jewish area, and my teachers were Hasidim, Hasidic Jews. So most of them were, and so I was very fascinated with them, what they wore, and just their unique rituals. And so I would ask so many questions about it. And they had a lot of holidays that we got off, which I loved as well. And so I just was so interested. And when I later, actually, I would walk home through the Hasidic area of Brooklyn and then cross the big Eastern Parkway. And that was sort of the big divide between communities. And I remember one afternoon, one of the, what do you want to call that? The I wouldn't say he was a rabbi, but I'm not quite sure what that role was. But he asked me if I could be a Shabbos goy, which just means I am the person who comes in, the Saturday stranger is what it correlates to, who helps them turn off the lights and things of that nature.
Hmm.
And so when I went to college, my very first job was working at the chapel, but I worked for Hillel. And I would, do things that they weren't doing on the Sabbath. And I would hang around for their conversations, and I found them very enlightening. But I knew that I wasn't Jewish, so I needed to figure out where I could be. So I went and talked to a chaplain, and I would have conversations with him after work. Because he would come in and prepare for Sunday morning chapel Saturday night. And so I started asking lots of questions and asked him how he started doing what he did. And he told me all about it. And I kind of took that with me and thought I would like to be a chaplain, but I didn't quite know how. And so it takes somebody sort of directing you. I just knew. And so later I went to seminary and worked with Peter Gomes, who was a chaplain at Harvard University. And I was selected by him. I don't quite know how. I don't recall the process. I know he had a very unique way of picking people that he wanted to mentor. And I became a seminarian and later worked for the Harvard Memorial Church following my matriculation from Harvard Divinity School. That's
And
how
then,
I got into that.
so he was a chaplain, he mentored you, and that's when you said, I want to be a chaplain. Right. Now, growing
Yes.
up as a young person growing up, was your family religious? Were you always in church or in temple or whatever?
Okay. So um, my mother was not very religious. My mother and stepfather. And he was actually a Rastafarian, which I'm not sure if you know, but a lot of people know of Bob Marley, but they don't know that Rastafarianism is a religion. And he was Rastafarian and very involved in that. My mother did not go to church, but there is a backstory to this. So my grandmother did, and I would go to church with her. But when we lived in New York, we did not live near her. And so when I was we have an extended family, so we kind of moved around. And my great grandmother actually was Catholic, and I went to church with her. Uh, and then my maternal grandmother and my paternal grandmother were Baptist. I went to church with my great grandmother, and it seemed like every church I went to, they would ask me to do something. And one of them was singing. For like some play or something. And then they said, "Oh, you can really sing." And so, actually, when I lived in New York, is when I really started getting involved. Now, I was not going to church, but I had an after school program at the Church of God in Christ, where Timothy Wright was the pastor in
Ah,
Brooklyn.
yes.
And I had no idea about who he was. It was just an after school program. And so I went there and they asked me to be in their Christmas play. And I sang Chestnuts Roasting. I don't think that's the actual song. I remember that was the song. And the women in that church said, "Oh, you can sing." And so after the church school, they would pray for us. And they would sing this song, "I Expect a Miracle," every day by the Clark sisters.
Right.
Uh, and I just really fell in love with gospel music and sang in the choir while I was not going to church at that time when I lived there. And then when I moved back to Philadelphia, I moved back with my grandparents. I've been shuffled around a bit, but very extended family. And I started singing in the gospel choir and singing around. I've actually sung background for Sandra Crouch. I don't know if Sandra
Andre, I
Crouch's
know.
sister.
So,
I've
yes.
sung for Shirley Caesar and Dee Dee Sharp. Many people don't know who Dee Dee Sharp is. I think she did the mashed potato or something years ago,
Yes.
and I sang background for her. But she was doing gospel at this point. This was much later in her life
That's right.
through this group that I was in, and so I became very involved in the church through the singing ministry. And then I felt called into the ministry when I was 19. So that's sort of how I got into the church through actually a school program, which is why I think I work in school and church communities because both places really formed me, I would say.
Well, that's a background in singing experience that most people can't talk about and
That is
probably would
true.
love to have the same engagement and opportunity that you did. So you're at Harvard, you're being mentored, and there you are saying chaplaincy is where I'm going to be. So what steps did you take after that?
Well, I worked immediately after graduation at the Harvard Memorial Church, and I was the Christian church school director.
Okay.
And the Harvard Memorial Church School is an anomaly and a paradox because it is a church school, but it's open to everyone on the campus, all the children of faculty, staff, and the community as well.
Mhm.
So anyone's welcome, no matter what religion they are. And so we had people from every faith walk in that church, surprisingly. So it was an interfaith church because it was Harvard's church. Peter Gomes was a Baptist, and most of the ministers were Episcopal. So, yes. And I was actually, at that time, nothing. I was not yet ordained, and I was getting asked in different organizations. And I worked for a professor at Harvard who's deceased now, is Lowell Livesey. He was doing public religion in Boston, a book, and I helped do some research for that. And I had to go around to all these churches and look at how they interacted in the city. In
Mhm.
one particular church, the Roxbury Presbyterian Church,
Yes.
Pastor Hamilton was there, and he asked me to start coming as I was doing my research, and I ended up being ordained with that denomination.
Right.
And so from there, I then started working. I worked at Wellesley College. That was my first job after working at Harvard. And then from there, I went to Princeton. And then after that, I think I worked at Brown. And so in the chaplain world, you kind of do have to know someone, I will say. It's very sort of, it's like an apprenticeship in a way, and people take you under their wing and they usually recommend you. And so that pretty much how I got to Wellesley, Harvard, and then so on. And yeah.
Okay. Now, you're experiencing a lot of different churches, and
Yes,
you've decided. Now, most people think of chaplaincy, they relate it to an correctional institutes.
they do. Or a
Yes.
hospital.
Right, or a hospital, a chaplain, right. And so you're though now engaged with dealing with chaplains at higher educational institutions.
Yes.
And so how did you move, and where did you go to have your first chaplaincy experience, and how did you get to doing what you're doing now?
Okay, so Wellesley, I would say, well, the one at Harvard was a chaplaincy, but it was very unique in that it was, I did a faith and life form, and we did Saturday. We did morning prayers every single day, actually, at Harvard. People don't know that. They have church 7 days a week,
Hmm.
even on Saturday, which was something that John Harvard wanted. And so it's a 15-minute service, but it is full of beautiful music. They have a full choir, sometimes an orchestra, and they have a speaker. And so I learned about precision, and you could get it done in 15 minutes. A sermon, a little homily, a prayer, and some music. And that happened every single day. So one of my jobs as seminarian was to lead that service and to schedule the people who spoke, which always started with the president of the university. And the last person, we would go through the department chairs. Sometimes we'd have guest speakers. And so that was sort of what I did. And then the church school after that in Wellesley. And so I would say the person who was at Wellesley College, the dean, was Victor Kazagian, who's retired now. And he was a HCS grad. And so I worked there for a year after that. So that's pretty much how I got involved in that. And one of the things I will say, because it is somewhat of a niche of ministry in that you are really becoming a public theologian. And so a chaplain is hired by the institution, which is mostly a secular institution, to do ministry within the context of. So it takes some adaptive leadership, to be able to do that. So that's how I got to do that, and learned from Peter by watching him. So he worked, he had meetings with the president of the university about ethical issues and things of that nature. He also, did ministry, funerals, baptisms, and just counseling, community engagement, you name it. So you're not a pastor. And so a lot of times people think that pastors are chaplains in a way that you can seamlessly go through that, but it's a whole different type of, you're a liaison pretty much, I would say, between the public, the secular, and the sacred. Yeah. That's
Hmm.
what I.
Right. So, for those of you who have just joined us, you have been listening to Reverend Dr. Terry Ofori, and she's sharing her journey to doing what she's passionate about, and that's being a chaplain. But she is also the head of an initiative for chaplains for the Episcopal chaplaincy. And she's at the national, and I need to say this correctly, the national. An association, right? National
Yes, of
Association of
Episcopal schools.
Episcopal Schools. And So we are going to take a quick break. But if you have a question for Dr. Forey, we would love to hear from you. And so once again, we're going to encourage you. Give us a call, 781 384 5587, or you can email me, Regina at rgbinternetradio.com. We need to take a minute out for one of our sponsors. It's a very quick sponsorship, but run and grab yourself something to drink or snack on. We're not going to be long, and we will be right back.
At Portal to Hope, we're here to help victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking crimes. We provide support, resources, and hope to those who need it most. We believe that everyone deserves to live a life free from violence. If you or someone you know is in danger, please reach out for help. Call us at 781 338 7678. We offer a variety of services, including counseling, legal aid, job assistance, and housing support. We also work to raise awareness about these issues and to advocate for change. Together, we can create a world where everyone is safe and free from violence. Portal to Hope is here for you.
And we are back on the Winning Women Talk Show. I'm Regina Shearer, your host, and our guest tonight is Reverend Dr. Terry Afori. While we were on break, this email came in, and it said, "I heard you talk about that about a chaplain being a public theologian. Could you say a little bit more about that?"
Yes, that's a good question. Thank you. So I feel that the public theologian is one who is looking at the current topics of the day. Not that a pastor would not, but I think their job is to explain questions of ontology, epistemology. Those are just big words for like questions of why and how, and the questions that people have that are not necessarily questions that, say, a parishioner might have. One who, say, doesn't go to church but wants to know more about God, about or about religion. And so you're sort of at the intersections of life where people do life. And I think Jesus was a public theologian, and that you notice he, from what we see in scriptures, he would go out and say, take a look at the fig tree, or take a look at, the grass. He would talk about very simple everyday things and make them connect them to people's lived experience, or the parables. He would tell stories. And
Mhm.
so what I think the public theologian does is interact with people through their life stories, which is what I'd like to think, making everybody's story sacred is what I think a public theologian.
Oh, I
They're
like
all
that.
sacred to me, but because sometimes people think, well, I'm a secular person, which I don't think really anybody is secular, because we all have a spirit, even if you're talking about the human spirit. And so I think we all are made in the image of God and have the, imago Dei, which is the image of God in us. And so I think the public theologian encourages others to see themselves as a part of the sacred story, the way I
Right.
like to think of it.
So your experiences, not only at all the many different schools that you have shared them with, but they cover a lot of things. And I when I say that it covers a lot of things, it's everything from spiritual formation, which is what you were just talking about, to educational leadership. And
Yes.
I'm just I, so I want to add, and student development and cultivating, a sense of belonging. But if you could take us through that, what your role has been in educational leadership and in student development, and of course, cultural, cultivating communities, right, of learning and of belonging.
Thank you. It seems like a lot. However, if you're thinking cyclically, it's all connected. So if you think of a line, it's like a long line. But cyclically, all of these parts come together. So, for example, the work of, say, DEI, which we call it. Personally, my philosophy about it is that we're building a beloved community of people who are all made in the image of God. Thinking at the end of the day, when we talk about the work of equity and inclusion, we're talking about being fair, doing justly, walking humbly with God.
Mhm.
I see it as an extension of my spiritual life. And so for me, it's a no-brainer. And if you think about all of the major social justice movements in the world, most of them have been led by people of faith. Martin Luther King, for one, the Reverend Doctor. As students now, they don't know that he was a reverend and a pastor. They
Right.
just know. And a lot of the speeches, which is interesting. I remember at one chapel service, I do a Martin Luther King chapel every year, no matter what school I'm in. And the one student was quoted something from the book of Amos and said Martin Luther King. I said, well, actually, Martin Luther King was just, sharing a scripture there. And so it was so interesting and fascinated. So many of the young people had no idea that he was a reverend. You think about people like Harriet Tubman. She was actually a minister. I call her a modern, historic spiritual director. She said very clearly, if you look at her historic text, she was led by the Holy Spirit. Now, why would I believe that? Because she couldn't read or write. She didn't know where she was going. So I know it was something that was guiding her. And so she also had a disability. So, and she, counted it all to the glory of God. And so if you think about even in other faiths, you think about the Dalai Lama, a person of faith, Gandhi, a person of faith, you can just go on and on. So for me, that's the outgrowth of faith, is that how do we show up in public? What does that look like? Not what we look like in the church, but how do we show up in the world? And that is basically what Jesus, the Great Commission was, hey, I'm going to another place, but I'm sending you out to do the work, you know, evangelizing, discipling, and teaching. And so I think that sometimes we've lost a little bit of that. And we want the young people to come to a church when, in fact, Jesus went out, even the woman at the well, he met her on the way. He would have never been admitted to a synagogue. He went out of his way to meet people. And I think that we need to start doing more of that.
Yes, I agree with you on that wholeheartedly.
Yes.
I mentioned about your work with students in Ghana, student development
Yes.
in Ghana. So could you tell us a little bit about that? When and how?
Okay. So I actually started a Pan African Youth Leadership Development company. And that, again, I don't know where some of these thoughts and things come from, but I'm going to say that they're a culmination of prayer put into action. I don't quite know always where the impetus came from, but I know my church synod was having grants for mission work. And so I wrote this grant to work with young people and to reach them. And I wanted to tie that to my love of African American history, African history, and really look at sort of how we use spirituality as a form of resistance and how it was our faith that, brought us through so many things. And so I actually was going to Ghana to look at some partnerships there. And that was at the end of 2019. And I was set to come back in March, actually on March the 16th. And on March the 15th, everything was shut down. And
Mhm.
so I ended up being there until 2021.
Hmm.
And so what happened during that time was really, really, of course, it was a very unique time, the pandemic. And so I was a professor at Ursinus College, and I was the chaplain and director of religious and spiritual life. So I had a whole department that I was in charge of, students in my class, and I had to do all of this from Ghana. And I went with 2 weeks worth of clothing, but I came back with 2 years worth of clothing because they make clothes over there. So I love that. So I didn't have anything, but they make them there. specially made. And so I had a lot of time on my hands during the day because the time difference. So I had to get up in the middle of the night and teach my classes, and my students loved it because I'd show them around where I was. It was just very interesting time. And the students there, all their classes outside. Now they do a lot of things outside, but they moved everything outside, which is why I think they did so well during the pandemic, because they had everything. The weather was, feasible to do so. And so I would see all these kids outside, and sometimes they would sing around, and I like singing. And so I said to them, "Hey, what do you want to do after school?" And I am an ecumenist at heart. I think that's because I've been sort of influenced by many different Christian denominations as well as faiths.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to them, let's get the kids together in the village. So I was actually staying in Kibi, Ghana, which is the eastern central region of Ghana, partway between Accra and Kumasi. I was in the village of Kibi, and the kids had time on their hands. And so I said, well, we're going to have a concert that I want you all to organize, because most of them spoke in their dialect, which I did not know. I knew because one of the churches had invited me to speak there, and also and communion was a part of that service. And I don't know if I gave the bread, but I had no idea what was going on. This isn't going to work. So I, was outside with the kids, and I'm telling you, these kids, they put on a fashion show. A lot of them were good sewers. They did a fashion show for like the whole village. And when I say the whole village, it's like a small town.
Mm-hmm.
And they put on a concert with all of the local churches in the area. They just needed people to believe in them, to have a little bit of money. And I had some American dollars. And so I was able to get them some instruments. And that concert was fantastic. And so you know what? This is obviously what I'm called to do. And I was also working with younger kids from some of the schools. And so I said, I might want to work with some younger kids. So I worked, which led me to Brooks. So after I came back from Ghana, I was asked to work at the Brooks School. And I love working with young people. And yeah, so that's kind of my story there with the educational, and I created scholarships. Always the scholarships are great. I don't care what you have, even if it's $50, $500, to encourage kids to continue on in school. And so that was one of the impetuses for them to do this, because I said, hey, listen, I will help you with some funding for school. And most of the kids were either in boarding school, and it's not universal education, so you have to pay for education all the way up through, although they get free education later, but through what we would call P through 12, they had to pay for it. And so,
Wow.
yes, nothing free like we have.
Right.
Although we pay on the other end for college and university, very expensive. So it's sort of the other way around.
Right.
And yes, and so I was able to help some scholarships. And so that became my program, just, talking to the kids and getting them to do things. And so so it was what it was.
So do you continue to connect in Ghana, or?
I do. I have. So also while I was there, again, all these things are interconnected. There was something, a women's group, and we had a women's ministry, sort of a connection. And we would have these gatherings and convenings where women would come together. I think it was called Women Preach. And we would come together and preach and have little sort of revivals and things of that nature. And I would work with some of those women and mentor them. And so that was also something that I was doing at the same time.
Oh, that's wonderful. So your work not only was enriching for the young people, but it continues.
Yes, it does actually. And some of these kids have graduated, and so I still am in touch with them, and they're
Oh.
in ministry. So it's wonderful to see. Yes.
So did you have a translator, because you mentioned that they didn't speak
Well, the churches deliberately spoke in their dialect because they were no longer sort of using missionaries, so they made a conscious choice. But I will say this: I went there as a Presbyterian minister, which I was ordained. But I went to the Anglican church primarily because they spoke English.
Okay.
So most of the work that I did was with the students at the Anglican school. There was a school, the Ofori Pannon School in Kibbe. And then I went to the Trinity Church in the capital city in Accra. And so I did a lot of work with the Anglican Church simply because they had English services. And that's how I got very involved with the Episcopal Church in America.
Okay. Well, now, Terry, I know you think you got past that very quickly, but the Ofori what school?
Well, it's the Ofori Pannon School, and that is Ofori is a name, a family name, and the Pannon is that's a part of it, but it's well, the king of that area is from the Ofori family, and so he endorsed that school.
Is that one of the reasons you picked Ghana? Is because you knew you had Ofori roots there?
Yes, yes, that is why. Yes,
That is amazing. Who gets
yes,
those opportunities to identify the family
yes,
connection?
yes. So that was why. Yes. And
How did
that
you?
may also be why people listen to me. I mean, to be fair, then that's a royal family there. The king, he's called the Ochaheni. They have Henny means like the supreme person, and so they're in the Ashanti tribe. This was the Achim
Mhm,
tribe, but the
mhm.
Ashanti tribe is I believe he's something Henny also. There's Henny just means a big person. And so, yes. And so I do think that, and then also being American, it was very easy, I have to say, to just galvanize, uh,
Right.
young people. So, and I mean, when they bring people, they bring people. So it was lovely to see that. It was
Did
a
you
wonderful
know
experience.
did you know this when you were young, or when did you find out that you had these connections, these roots?
Oh, it was a marital connection, actually.
Okay.
So that's how I knew. Yes.
Right. Okay. I that
Yes.
I, all of that is so interesting. Okay,
Yes.
so I want to be sure. There's a couple of emails. I'll get to those, but I want to be
Okay.
sure that we connect on something that's very important to you,
Okay.
and
Yes.
that you have a website for, and that is the Women is
Yes.
Freedom Project, and so
Yes.
is that part of what you established in Ghana, or is this something totally separate?
This is actually something totally separate, but I will say the seeds were planted when I was in Ghana
Okay.
because I was invited to this woman's, sort of conclave, and I made some really lasting friendships there. So much was happening in Ghana. I'm gonna say even in Africa during the pandemic. Um, and I don't know why, but I think everyone was trying to fulfill a purpose or something because no one knew if you were going to be living that long. And so at that time, people just had a certain urgency about things. I think that's what it was because, of course, all over the world, people were dying every day. And it wasn't happening like that in Africa, again, probably because everything was outside, but people were still very concerned. A vaccine hadn't been developed. So I think there was an urgency about making sure people were doing the things that they were called to do. And
Mhm.
so I noticed that fervency and the urgency there. And it was wonderful, actually. And so these women were talking about coming together and needing mentoring. And so they asked me a lot of questions. Most of them were not ordained, but they were service workers. And so I would talk to them about that and just ended up making good relationships. So when I came back to the States, uh, I went to a church service one New Year's Eve, and actually Stevie Wonder was there, which was interesting. And it was at the First Baptist Church of Glen Arden. I'm not a member of that church. I was visiting a friend.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember talking about, making sure I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I said, I want to do something for women. And I will say, what started this was the what was happening with the government and the national scene is still kind of happening, where our history was sort of being rewritten or being erased. And I said, I want to lift up the stories of women of color. And so I don't know if you've ever heard of Pauli Murray before,
Yeah. Yeah.
but Pauli Murray's Pauli Murray's niece is a friend of mine.
Oh.
And so one of her, some site that she was listed on was taken down. And I
Right.
said, oh no, this isn't good. So we went to talk to someone at her church. How I found this, the church where her family had founded in Maryland. And I said, I want to do something about this. So I spoke with someone at the church and they said, oh, I have a friend who can help you with that. And so I decided to have the Pauli Murray Freedom School, sort of in the manner of the Freedom Schools of the 60s.
Right.
And I had the Pauli Murray Freedom School. That was the very first thing that I did. And it was for young girls to teach them about, of course, Pauli Murray and famous Black Fannie Lou Hamer and
Mm-hmm.
Harriet Tubman, of course. And I lived in Massachusetts, but the person who said, hey, I'll give you some money to do something for these girls in the summer. And they lived in Annapolis. And so they said, well, it needs to be in Maryland. It needs to be in Annapolis, Baltimore region. And so I did that. And out of that, I had mentors for those girls. It was for a 1 week program. And we talked about, back when we had some arts, we did a Harriet Tubman walk. We did all this, historical stuff. And at the end, we had a session for an intergenerational session for the young girls to meet with their mentors. And at the end of that, the mentor said, hey, we need to have something for ourselves because we need help because a lot of these women were also facing unemployment. That was, the beginning of, a number of women of color who had been losing their jobs and things of that nature. And so I said, well, we should minister to these women. And along the way, the Womanist Freedom Project came out of that. And so that is an initiative for women of color and girls of color that they would learn truth that would set them free. And so originally it was about educational, historical truth. But then we started talking about the truth of the Word of God. And while we were on this nature walk, there's an app actually that will reenact Harriet Tubman's Underground Railroad. It's from the National Park Service. And so I used that and had to, pretend that we were slaves and walk through these trees and things of that nature. And there were some bees out. And I thought, how in the world did they get through this? And it was the daytime. And so the student says, oh, I would never be able to do it. And so somehow or another, I think this was the Holy Spirit. I started thinking about bees. And then I did a study on bees. And then, I found out about Deborah, the prophet in the Bible in Judges. Her name meant bee. And so I started connecting the two. And I took the girls to a beehive. There was a Baltimore Black Beekeepers Association, and they were making bees in the city and teaching the girls how to make things out of honey and things of that nature. And out of that grew the Daughters of Deborah prayer group. That's also sort of the foundational bedrock for the Womenist Freedom Project. And the goal moving forward is to have a freedom school every summer, 1 week for the younger girls, and then the second week for the women. And we hope to do that in Africa. So that is the goal. But currently, yes. So currently we plan ahead. So we're looking to hopefully do that in 2027. Uh, so that's where we are with the Womanist Freedom Project.
That sounds so exciting. So,
Thank you.
um, one of the questions that I said I'll wait, but you've already answered it, was they wanted to know about the women's project in Ghana, but now you've talked about this, and the question was, how do I get involved in this?
Okay. Well,
Well, before
we
you
have a
answer,
website.
before
Yes.
you answer, we do have a caller on the line. So let me take
Okay.
like before they hang up because I
Okay.
I don't know how long they've been there, but I'm going to
Thank you for waiting because I do believe my questions answers are very adept. It's a long way of saying they're
okay,
long.
let's see. Good evening, caller, and welcome to the Winning Women Talk Show. You're on the air with Dr. Terry Ofori.
Hi, good evening, Dr. Regina. Good evening, Dr. Terry. I
Evening.
I just wanted to commend you, Dr. Terry, on this idea of the Freedom School for the girls. Um, and there's a reason why. Uh, every time I turn around, I could see Black history, attempting to be erased. And it's only a matter of time, unfortunately, if people like yourself aren't focusing on this, where it'll just become an afterthought. And it's a sad thing that I think that it could get to that point, especially when the younger generations just aren't exposed to it.
Yes.
And I don't think any of it on the end of Black folks, myself being Black, is intentional. But I think we sometimes feel like, okay, we were taught a limited amount of information in school, but somebody will teach that. They'll get exposed to it somehow. It'll get exposed through social media or,
It's
you
true.
know, um, MLK celebrations or what have you. But I just don't see it being effective. But what you're doing with the freedom schools, I really love that because it's a way for the stories to continue to be heard and taught and experienced. Like you said, you did a session with some of the girls, like role playing, I think you had mentioned.
Yes.
And I just love that. And I wanted to commend you on it. And I hope that idea catches on in other spaces because I feel like that might be one of the only ways we will be able to continue teaching those stories. So I just wanted to commend you on that and make that comment. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's very encouraging. Very encouraging. And yes, we do need that. We really do.
Okay. Caller, are you still there? Okay, I don't think our caller is. No, she hung up. Okay,
Okay.
because many times they're watching us on YouTube or Facebook and there's a delay.
Okay.
So they can't hear
Okay.
you and keep up with the
Let's
time. So she's
see.
probably listening
Okay.
to your response. But
Okay. Okay.
but that so that takes care of both questions.
Okay.
Through her comments and your explanation. The What is your hope other than give them gaining a sense of, and I'm assuming now, so please add, because I'm curious, what is your hope for the young people and women who participate in this initiative? Um, this Women is Free project, these 2 weeks that you'll have next year, um, one of them in Maryland and one of them in Ghana. What is the outcome that you, other than a sense of there's history that you may not be aware of? What else are you looking for out of that?
I think that I'm looking for building community. And I find that, I the reason why, as I started studying the bee and the beehive, it's a queen bee. It's all these women together who are making this life sustaining food and they're pollinating and they're doing all this work, which is why I thought about, wow, the beehive really functions as a metaphor for women in community. And fortunately, the drones are not that involved, but it's not that we, don't love the men. But I think for this particular, just focusing on women. And I think I want to help women focus on opportunities in nonprofit leadership, education, ministry, chaplaincy, uh, and help them sort of build networks to pollinate, really to cross pollinate ideas, to encourage one another, to pray for one another. And I think, that's getting busy doing that work,
Right.
uh, and also giving them a platform. So what I try to do with my starting with my board is whatever area that I see they need encouragement in. Um, so, for example, we have a woman who some of them are divorced, some are widows, some of them are young, in graduate school, some are in undergraduate school. And really, there's this thing that bees do. They share life. They communicate through their lips, actually. That's how they communicate with one another. And the word, debar or devora is the word. And so how do we use our words to encourage one another and really just speaking life into each other? And so my hope is that we can get each woman to be inspired to do what she was called to do in the earth. And so we take turns having women, whatever their platform is, and give them an opportunity to be featured on our platform, somewhat similar to what you're doing, them sharing their stories.
Hmm.
I think our stories are sacred, the parables of life. And there's nothing that is wasted in terms of, sometimes we think, oh, I hear people speaking, and I always have to say, watch what you're speaking because the power of life and, death is in the tongue. And they may not think they have much to offer, but there's so much from one life, so precious. And so my goal is just to encourage them to be all that God's called them to be and to be set free by the truth, of course, of the word. Um, and the truth that they are made in the image of God and that they do have gifts and talents and that they do have a purpose and that they are born for a purpose and for a reason and that everyone matters. And so that
Right.
is basically what I hope to achieve out of this. And I also benefit from this because I'm so encouraged by these stories and their networks.
Right. Well, I applaud you and commend you for this work because we seem to be in a day and time when things are going backwards, and especially with regard to um, genderism and
Yes.
where the power structures lie. And I'm very concerned because this isn't just a USA issue. This is an international issue. There was some progress being made with the Taliban, and now it's going backwards again. And there are
Yes.
women, the women in Sudan. I think of all these places in Africa, in South America, it's all over. And even here in this nation, the there was a slow tick of women starting to become CEOs and being on
Yes.
executive boards and trustee boards and advisory boards and things and at the top levels of corporate America and any other aspect of us, and now it's going back down. And I look at that and I'm trying to understand um, why there's this push to suppress. And so
Mm,
women aren't going to fight for what they believe they should have access to un- unless they know they're valuable. And you're helping
right.
young women in particular, as well as grown women, understand the value that they've had in this country and in other parts of the world. I hope that this program expands into every nation of this globe we live in, because women have to have the rights to do more than procreate.
Amen.
And so I wish you nothing but the best. And last, before we end, we have, if you can, in 2 minutes, so that your work with the, helping chaplains to connect with other chaplains at secondary and post-secondary institutions across the United States. Are you? Is there a mentoring program in place, and how does that connection happen?
That's interesting. The National Association of Episcopal Schools does have a chaplain mentoring program. This initiative is rather new, and I am making connections with them. Basically, our primary goal is to make connections between secondary ed and higher ed leaders with spiritual life and to create a community of practice. But our secondary goal is really the spiritual formation of our young people.
Right.
And so making sure that our chaplains are equipped and ready to do that work, which is so critical because, as we know, our young people are not necessarily going to church anymore. We can meet them wherever they are, and our chaplains are doing so much of that work. That the spiritual formation, pastoral care journey, and walking with our students wherever they find them. And I think what I'm hoping to do with this work that I'm called to currently.
Well, again, I can see there is that need, and I worry about our young people today, especially COVID really had a greater impact than I think any of us would have imagined, and that was the isolation created social media as a new
Yes,
community, a new family. Not that they didn't have friends and likes, but now it's isolated them from actual face-to-face contact and communication.
yes,
So there is work to do. You know, if they can't find one another, they're not going to find Jesus. You know,
that's right. That's so true.
so I again, I wish you nothing but the best in that much needed work. There is so much to you. Um, people people don't know that we had a long conversation, but Ghana's not the only place she's been. She's a world traveler. She is world known, and she is exceedingly appreciated by many people in ministries and in education. And so I want to thank you so much for spending time with us tonight on the Winning Women Talk Show. And you are a winning woman. Matter of fact, Reverend Dr. Terry Ofori, you are phenomenal. You are more than
I
phenomenal.
love that.
So
And thank you for being such an inspiration. I so enjoyed your life story. I mean, oh, it's so wonderful. I would love for you to share that more and maybe perhaps write a book if you haven't already. Really appreciate it. I'm getting to know your story. Thank you, because our stories are sacred.
yes.
They are.
And I want to thank you for sharing yours. We will be in prayer and continue that to believe that the best is yet to come. And we thank you for the impact you are having now and will have in the future. And so, again, for all of you who joined us tonight, thank you so much for spending time with us on the Winning Women Talk Show. We're glad that you stayed with us for this time. And I hope that you heard some things tonight that are going to prick your conscience, that are going to stimulate you. Your brain activity ought to be going right now, thinking, I would like to do something like that. You don't have to be a chaplain to have a meaningful impact on young people and young adults today. They need our direction, they need our guidance so that they can focus to make this world a better place in the future. And so thank you for spending that time. We'll see us next week, next Thursday, same time, same place on the Winning Women Talk Show. And don't forget, if she can do it, so can you. And this week, we ask that you do one thing alone, and that is love somebody.